What if I told you the world's most popular drink was first brewed over 6,000 years ago, in a time when the first civilizations were just beginning to form? Long before modern breweries, ancient Sumerians were crafting beer not just as a drink, but as a central part of their daily life, their economy, and even their religion. From sacred rituals to being used as currency, beer has always been more than just a beverage. Before I begin, where in the world are you watching from? I would love to know where my fellow alcohol historians are tuning in from. Now, join us as we take a journey back in time to explore the ancient origins of beer and how it helped shape the world we know today. In the bustling cities of ancient Mesopotamia around 6,000 years ago, one of humanity's most enduring creations was born: beer. It's hard to imagine a time when this drink, now beloved worldwide, wasn't part of the cultural fabric of nearly every civilization. Yet beer's origins trace back to the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where the Sumerians, one of the world's earliest advanced civilizations, helped refine the art of brewing. The story begins with the most essential ingredient: barley. Barley was among the first grains to be cultivated in the ancient Near East, thanks to the region's fertile soil and ideal climate. Early agriculturalists, unaware of what would come, likely stumbled upon fermentation through simple accidental means. Perhaps some barley left in a rain-soaked jar began to ferment naturally, creating a liquid with a slightly bitter, intoxicating flavor. It didn't take long for people to recognize the transformative nature of this liquid, and beer was born. The Sumerians, known for their innovations in writing, law, and astronomy, were also innovators in the culinary world. The world's oldest known recipe, discovered in a Sumerian text known as the Hymn to Ninkasi, isn't for a dish, but for beer. This hymn, written around 1800 BCE, not only praises the goddess Ninkasi, the Sumerian deity of beer, but also doubles as a recipe for brewing beer. The hymn describes the process of brewing with barley, water, and a variety of other ingredients that contributed to the distinctive taste of the Sumerian brew. Ninkasi was not just a goddess of beer, she embodied the significance of beer to the Sumerian people. The hymn to Ninkasi praises her as the provider of the drink, calling on her to bless the people with her brew. For the Sumerians, beer was sacred, used in religious rituals, and as a daily part of their diet. In fact, beer was so central to Sumerian life that it was often brewed in large quantities for communal feasts and religious ceremonies. Beer wasn't just a drink for the wealthy or elite. It was part of the daily lives of Sumerian workers as well. One of the most important aspects of ancient beer was its role as a nutritional staple. Sumerians drank beer as a primary source of hydration, particularly for workers who toiled in the fields or on grand construction projects. Given the fact that much of the water in ancient cities was contaminated, beer became a safer alternative. The fermentation process removed harmful pathogens from water, making beer the healthier choice. Interestingly, the Sumerians also had a deep understanding of the brewing process. While they didn't know the science behind yeast or fermentation as we understand it today, they were aware that the natural fermentation of barley could create a drink that was both nourishing and intoxicating. The brewing of beer was often done in large communal batches, where families or workers could come together to brew, share, and drink. Beyond its religious and nutritional significance, beer also played a pivotal role in the Sumerian economy. Much like the Egyptians, the Sumerians used beer as a form of currency. Workers, particularly those who built the grand temples and ziggurats, were often paid in beer. The idea of beer wages was not unique to Mesopotamia. Beer was also used as a form of payment in ancient Egypt. This speaks to how essential beer was to life in these early civilizations, not just as a drink but as a trade commodity. As Sumerian society grew more complex, beer also became a commodity in trade. The brewing process spread along trade routes, reaching neighboring regions like Elam, Akkad, and later, the rest of the ancient world. Beer brewed in Mesopotamia was prized for its quality, and the recipe evolved as it spread to other cultures. With the rise of writing and commerce, Sumerians kept meticulous records of beer brewing, and the importance of beer was enshrined in various legal and economic systems. In fact, beer was so integral to the economy that it was governed by laws. One of the most famous laws from the Code of Hammurabi, the ancient Babylonian law code, stated that brewers who sold poor quality beer could be severely punished, underscoring the value placed on the drink. For the Sumerians, beer was not just a mundane part of life, it had spiritual significance. In the temples of Mesopotamia, beer was offered to gods in elaborate ceremonies. The Sumerians believed that beer had divine properties, capable of bringing the blessings of the gods into their lives. The hymn to Ninkasi is one of many examples of how beer was entwined with the divine. Ninkasi herself was often depicted as the one who bestowed the gift of beer upon humanity. This belief wasn't unique to the Sumerians. In ancient Egypt, beer was also a drink of the gods. The Egyptians too had a goddess of beer, Tenenet, who was associated with brewing and drinking. Beer was used in the temples during offerings to the gods, and it was often consumed by priests and nobles during religious festivals. Beer was also central to the Egyptian afterlife, where it was offered to the deceased in burial tombs, ensuring they had access to the drink in the afterlife. As we dive deeper into the history of beer, it's clear that this beverage was more than just a drink to ancient people. It was an integral part of their spiritual, social, and economic life. The Sumerians, in particular, recognized beer as a divine gift, a link between humanity and the gods, and a drink that nourished the body and the soul. As we continue to explore the origins of beer, we'll see how this ancient drink spread through time, shaping civilizations and leaving a legacy that endures today. As beer began to take root in Mesopotamia around 6,000 years ago, it wasn't long before its influence spread to neighboring civilizations. The ancient Egyptians, situated just to the west of Mesopotamia, were quick to adopt beer as a key component of their culture, making it as central to their daily life as it had been for the Sumerians. While the Sumerians refined the brewing process, the Egyptians made significant contributions to the evolution of beer by adding their own distinct touch. By the time the pharaohs rose to power, beer had already become an integral part of Egyptian society, and it was consumed by people from all walks of life. From the laborers who built the Great Pyramids to the priests performing sacred rituals in the temples, beer was shared by all. It was even used as an offering to the gods, underscoring the drink's sacred status. The Egyptians were innovative in their beer-making techniques. Unlike the Sumerians, who brewed a thick, porridge-like beer, the Egyptians refined their beer into a more liquid form. They used barley and emmer wheat as the main ingredients, and the beer was often flavored with a variety of herbs and spices. The Egyptians also introduced a process where the beer was strained to remove solids, creating a smoother, more drinkable product. This innovation made the beer more enjoyable, and it became a staple drink throughout Egypt. In Egypt, beer was closely associated with the gods and the afterlife. The Egyptians had their own beer goddess, Tenenet, who was often depicted as a woman holding a jug of beer. Beer was not just a drink for the living, it was also essential for the dead. As part of burial rituals, Egyptians would offer beer to the deceased, ensuring that they would have a supply of beer in the afterlife. This connection between beer and the afterlife is evident in the tombs of nobles and pharaohs, where jars of beer were placed beside the dead, providing them with sustenance for their journey into eternity. Beer was also a drink of ritual and reverence. In religious ceremonies, beer was poured as an offering to the gods, and it was consumed by priests and nobles during festivals. One of the most famous beer-related festivals in ancient Egypt was the Feast of the Valley, where large quantities of beer were brewed and consumed in honor of the gods. This event was a time for the people of Egypt to come together, share their beer, and celebrate the divine blessings of their deities. In addition to its spiritual and cultural significance, beer played a crucial role in the nutrition of ancient Egyptians. Much like the Sumerians, the Egyptians relied on beer as a key source of sustenance. For workers, especially those who labored in the hot sun, beer was a refreshing and nutritious drink that provided necessary calories. Beer was often consumed in large quantities by the working classes, who were given beer rations as part of their daily diet. Beer was not only a source of hydration and nutrition, but also a form of payment. Laborers, particularly those who worked on the construction of monumental projects like the pyramids, were paid in beer. This practice was similar to what the Sumerians had done, where beer was used as a form of currency. In ancient Egypt, beer was often used to pay workers who toiled on the grand building projects for the pharaohs. This beer-based payment system was essential to the economy, as it helped keep the labor force supplied with both food and drink. As Egypt and Mesopotamia flourished, beer's reach expanded through trade. Beer was a valuable commodity, and the brewing techniques of the Sumerians and Egyptians spread to neighboring regions. The ancient world saw the development of beer brewing practices in places like the Levant, Anatolia, and even parts of Europe. The exchange of goods and ideas along trade routes ensured that beer making was shared across the ancient world, from the bustling cities of Babylon to the Mediterranean coast. Beer became an important part of the economies of many ancient cultures. In Egypt, beer was often traded with neighboring regions for goods such as wood, metal, and other raw materials. The Egyptians were known to ship large quantities of beer across the Mediterranean, and beer made its way into the hands of people from different cultures and regions. Just as beer had played an essential role in the daily lives of the Sumerians and Egyptians, it became a symbol of prosperity and exchange as it traveled along ancient trade routes. Beer's influence was not limited to its practical uses in society. It also played a significant role in the arts and literature of ancient Egypt. Beer was often mentioned in Egyptian hymns, poetry, and art, where it was depicted as a symbol of abundance and divine favor. The famous Papyrus of Ani, which includes spells for the afterlife, mentions beer as a key element in the provision of sustenance for the deceased. In some tombs, paintings and inscriptions depict scenes of feasting, where the dead are shown enjoying large quantities of beer alongside food offerings. Beer also became a symbol of unity and celebration. During festivals, beer was shared among communities, fostering a sense of camaraderie and fellowship. The act of drinking beer was often seen as a communal event, reinforcing social bonds among people of different classes. Whether at religious ceremonies, royal feasts, or laborers' gatherings, beer was a drink that brought people together, bridging social divides and creating a shared sense of joy. As we move forward in the history of beer, it's clear that the drink's role extended far beyond simple refreshment. In ancient Egypt, as in Mesopotamia, beer was deeply intertwined with the culture, religion, and economy. It provided sustenance, fostered community, and served as an offering to the gods. The Egyptians' mastery of beer brewing techniques and their reverence for the drink would influence future civilizations, shaping the trajectory of beer's evolution for millennia to come. As beer continued to evolve in Mesopotamia and Egypt, its influence began to reach other ancient civilizations, including Greece and Rome. While these Mediterranean cultures are often more closely associated with wine, beer had a notable presence in their societies as well, particularly as the drink of choice for certain groups, and in specific contexts. By examining beer's role in Greece and Rome, we can see how it moved beyond the confines of the Near East and found its place in the broader ancient world. In ancient Greece, wine was the drink of choice for the elite and aristocracy, while beer was considered a drink of the lower classes, often looked down upon by the intellectuals and philosophers. Beer, known as brutos or zythos in Greek, was brewed primarily from barley and sometimes wheat, but it wasn't considered to have the same refinement as wine. The Greeks, who were pioneers in many aspects of culture, politics, and philosophy, preferred their wine, which was associated with the gods, particularly Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and ecstasy. Despite its lower status, beer was still widely consumed by common people, particularly workers and soldiers. Soldiers in the Greek armies often drank beer to sustain them on long campaigns. In fact, beer was a common ration for the Greek military, especially for the lower-ranked soldiers who could not afford wine. This is a recurring theme in ancient beer consumption. It was a more affordable alternative for the working class. Although beer was not celebrated in Greek literature the way wine was, it did appear in some works. For instance, the Greek playwright Aristophanes, in his comedic play The Clouds, 423 BCE, makes a passing reference to beer, indicating that it was known to the general population. However, it was clear that beer was still seen as a beverage of lower social standing. By the time of the Roman Empire, beer had spread from the Near East to the Mediterranean and beyond. While the Romans, like the Greeks, favored wine as their drink of choice, beer, referred to as cerevisia in Latin, began to gain some traction, particularly in the northern provinces of the empire, where barley was more readily available than in Italy. In Rome, beer was primarily consumed by the lower classes, slaves, and soldiers. It was especially popular in regions that had a strong tradition of brewing, such as Gaul, modern-day France, and Germania, modern-day Germany. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, 2379 CE, in his work Natural History, mentions beer as a common drink for the peoples of Gaul and Britain, noting that it was made from barley, and that it was an important part of their diet. Interestingly, the Roman elite didn't have the same disdain for beer as the Greeks. While wine remained the preferred drink of the Roman upper classes, beer was consumed in large quantities by the military. Roman soldiers, especially those stationed in the northern provinces, relied heavily on beer as a staple of their diet. Beer was often consumed alongside bread, forming a simple, nutritious meal for the common soldier. In fact, the Roman military was one of the primary distributors of beer across the empire. It became a vital part of the Roman supply lines, ensuring that soldiers could remain hydrated and nourished during long campaigns. Beer was also used in religious rituals in certain parts of the Roman Empire. In Northern Europe, beer was offered to the gods during sacred rites, particularly in Germanic and Celtic cultures. The Romans themselves didn't have a strong tradition of brewing beer for religious purposes, but they did adopt the practice from their northern neighbors. Tacitus, the Roman historian, described the Germanic tribes in his work Germania, 98 CE, noting that they brewed beer as part of their religious ceremonies. These beers were often offered to gods such as Freyr, the Norse god of fertility and prosperity. The Roman Empire's reach helped spread beer further across Europe, but it never reached the level of importance that wine held in Roman society. As the empire expanded, beer became more widespread, particularly in regions where barley was grown in abundance. The trade routes that connected Rome to its far-flung provinces helped introduce beer to new cultures and brought ingredients like hops into the brewing process. While beer was never as highly regarded as wine, its role in Roman society cannot be understated. The introduction of beer into the Roman diet played a significant role in the sustenance of the lower classes and military personnel, as well as the expansion of beer production across Europe. As the Roman Empire began to decline in the 5th century CE, beer continued to thrive in its northern provinces. The brewing traditions of the Germanic tribes, which had been influenced by Roman military presence, persisted long after the fall of Rome, laying the groundwork for the future of beer in medieval Europe. While the Romans may have been slow to embrace beer, the northern tribes of Europe, such as the Germanic and Celtic peoples, had a deep-rooted brewing tradition long before the Roman Empire took notice. These tribes had been brewing beer for centuries, using a variety of grains, such as barley and oats, and often flavoring their beer with herbs and spices. Beer was not only a drink, but a vital part of their religious practices and social customs. In Germania, beer was so central to life that it was often brewed as an offering to the gods. Germanic tribes brewed large amounts of beer during religious festivals, and they offered it to the gods to ensure prosperity and good harvests. These festivals were accompanied by feasts where beer was consumed in abundance, and the brewing process itself was often performed as a ritualistic act. The Celts also had their own beer traditions, with archaeological evidence suggesting that they brewed beer as early as 1000 BCE. Like the Germans, the Celts brewed beer not just for consumption, but as part of their spiritual practices. The Celts believed that the act of brewing was a divine gift, and their beer rituals often involved offerings to nature spirits and deities. As we look back at the role of beer in ancient cultures, it's clear that this humble beverage had an impact far beyond its simple ingredients. Beer wasn't just a drink, it was a symbol of community, culture, and sustenance. In ancient Greece, Rome, and the northern tribes, beer was more than just a way to quench thirst. It was a tool for social cohesion, a part of religious rituals, and a crucial element in the lives of soldiers and workers. The evolution of beer, from its origins in Mesopotamia to its spread across ancient civilizations, paved the way for the future of brewing. Though it was never as celebrated as wine in the classical Mediterranean world, beer's role in the daily lives of ordinary people cannot be understated. Its importance to the lower classes, soldiers and workers, ensured that beer would remain a vital part of life for centuries to come. As the Roman Empire fell and Europe entered the early Middle Ages, beer's status as a daily staple only grew. During this period, beer transitioned from being seen as a humble drink of the lower classes to a more widely respected beverage that was consumed by people of all walks of life. The Middle Ages also saw significant advancements in brewing techniques and a deeper integration of beer into both religious and secular life across Europe. In the wake of the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century CE, many parts of Europe entered a period of instability, yet beer remained a staple. By now, the ancient traditions of brewing beer had spread far beyond Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean. The tribes of northern Europe, such as the Franks, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings and Celts, continued to brew beer using barley, oats and various local grains, creating a wide variety of brews. In the early Middle Ages, the production of beer was primarily a household affair. Most families in rural communities brewed their own beer, often using rudimentary methods that had been passed down for generations. Brewing beer was not just a practical necessity, but also a social and spiritual activity. Beer was often brewed in large communal batches for feasts, festivals, and other significant gatherings, serving as a bond between neighbors and communities. Beer was particularly important in monastic life. By the 6th century, Christian monasteries in regions like France, Germany, and England began to take up the brewing tradition. Monks, particularly those from the Benedictine order, were among the first to refine the brewing process, not just as a means of providing for themselves, but as a way to support their religious communities. These early monks were skilled in fermentation, and their knowledge of brewing helped to perfect the beer-making process. Monasteries during the Middle Ages played an instrumental role in preserving and advancing brewing techniques. In addition to their religious duties, monks were often some of the most educated people in society, and they applied their knowledge to the craft of brewing. They were the ones who began experimenting with hops, which would eventually become the key ingredient that defined modern beer. Hops, a flowering plant used primarily for flavoring and preserving beer, were first used in the brewing process in Germany in the 9th century. While some early beers were brewed with herbs and spices, the introduction of hops provided an efficient way to preserve beer and gave it a distinctive bitter flavor that would become the hallmark of European beer. Hops helped to reduce the need for other preservatives and allowed for the production of beer that could be stored for longer periods of time, making it more suitable for trade and wider consumption. Monastic breweries were often self-sufficient, and many of them began selling their surplus beer to local communities or merchants. This created a reliable income stream for the monasteries and helped fund their religious and educational activities. As the knowledge of hop-based brewing spread, it became the foundation for brewing in the wider medieval European world. As Europe entered the High Middle Ages, approximately 11th to 13th centuries, the growth of towns and cities contributed to the increased demand for beer. The rise of urbanization brought people from rural areas into cities, where they lived in closer quarters and engaged in more specialized trades. With the growth of these urban centers came the rise of breweries, which were often established as independent enterprises. Beer was not just a drink for the poor, it had become part of everyday life for almost everyone. Cities began to develop their own breweries, and beer became a social drink that was consumed at local taverns, inns, and public houses. As towns grew, so did the beer market. By the 12th century, breweries were operating in cities such as Paris, London, Cologne and Brussels, each creating local styles of beer. In fact, many of these cities would become known for specific beer styles that would shape the evolution of European beer traditions. In England, the consumption of beer continued to rise, and by the late Middle Ages, ale houses were thriving throughout the country. Beer was often consumed at the start of the day, as a substitute for breakfast, and it was also used as a base for many traditional meals. It was considered safer to drink than water, as the fermentation process reduced the risk of waterborne diseases. The English even coined the term small beer to describe a low-alcohol version of beer that was often consumed throughout the day as a daily refreshment for children, workers, and travelers. The communal aspect of beer drinking remained a central feature throughout the Middle Ages. Feasts, festivals, and public celebrations were often centered around beer. Tournaments, weddings, and religious holidays were marked by large quantities of beer being brewed and shared among the community. The Christian feast of St. Martin, celebrated on November 11th, was one such occasion when beer played a central role, with large amounts of beer brewed in honor of the saint. Beer's association with religious feasts and ceremonies was particularly important in medieval Europe. In Germany, the custom of brewing beer for religious holidays and festivals grew, and it became customary for families to brew beer as an offering. Even the Feast of the Assumption in France saw the production of beer for local church events. With beer becoming such an integral part of medieval life, it wasn't long before governments and local authorities began to regulate its production. Laws surrounding the brewing and sale of beer became increasingly common throughout Europe. In England, the ale conner, a public official, was responsible for inspecting the quality of beer. They would ensure that beer was brewed properly, and that it wasn't watered down, or of poor quality. These regulations helped maintain the reputation of beer, and brewers were punished if their beer didn't meet certain standards. In Germany, the purity law of 1516, known as the Reinheitsgebot, would later be passed, setting standards for beer production that would last for centuries. While this law would come in the early modern period, it was based on the medieval practices that had already begun to regulate the quality and ingredients of beer. Beer continued to evolve during the Middle Ages, and the period saw great strides in both the production and social importance of beer. The innovations of the monastic brewers laid the groundwork for the modern brewing industry, while the expansion of beer consumption into urban centers ensured that beer would remain a central drink in European culture for centuries to come. Beer was no longer just a humble drink, it was a drink that brought communities together, celebrated religious holidays, and even contributed to the economy. As we move into the early modern period, beer would continue to evolve, and its role in society would only grow, helping to shape the way we drink today. As Europe entered the Renaissance, 14th to 17th centuries, a period marked by flourishing arts, science, and trade, beer began to evolve once again. Though wine remained the preferred drink for the elite, beer's role continued to grow, especially as brewing techniques became more refined and scientific knowledge about fermentation expanded. This period saw beer being recognized as not only a staple beverage, but as a product of craftsmanship and innovation that laid the groundwork for the modern brewing industry we know today. During the Renaissance, the growth of cities and the development of brewing guilds began to standardize beer production across Europe. The brewing guilds, which had started in the late Middle Ages, continued to expand their influence during this time, bringing organization and professionalism to beer production. These guilds regulated the brewing process, ensuring that only the best quality ingredients were used and that brewing techniques were passed down through apprenticeships. In cities like Cologne, Germany, Brussels, Belgium, and London, England, brewing guilds helped to establish beer as a regulated trade. The guilds ensured that beer was brewed with care and quality control, and they set standards for what constituted acceptable beer. These guilds were responsible for organizing the brewing workforce, and they played a crucial role in making beer a regulated industry. The Renaissance period also saw the development of more specialized beer styles. In Northern Europe, especially in the Low Countries, modern-day Belgium and the Netherlands, local brewers began experimenting with different grain combinations, fermentation techniques, and flavorings to create distinctive styles of beer. Lambic, a type of sour beer, is believed to have been first brewed in Belgium during this period, marking a significant evolution in the diversity of beer types. By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, hops became the dominant preservative in brewing, gradually replacing older herbs and spices that had been used in earlier medieval brews. This shift towards hops was especially important, because hops not only helped preserve beer, but also added a distinctive, bitter flavor that would become a hallmark of European beer. The Reinheitsgebot, or German beer purity law of 1516, was introduced during this period in the Duchy of Bavaria, modern-day Germany. While it would officially come into force later, this law was an important step in regulating the brewing process. The Reinheitsgebot restricted the ingredients in beer to just three: water, barley, and hops. Though the law was intended to prevent the adulteration of beer with inferior ingredients, it also had the effect of standardizing beer production, ensuring that high-quality beer was made with only the best ingredients. The law not only provided consistency in beer quality, but also helped to define beer as a culturally important product. Over time, the Reinheitsgebot became one of the cornerstones of German brewing, influencing the way beer was made in many parts of Europe. This purity law, which endures in some form in modern-day Germany, reflected the growing recognition of beer as a product of artistry and expertise, akin to fine wine. The Renaissance period also saw the expansion of European trade routes, which opened up new markets for beer and brought new ingredients into Europe. The Age of Exploration, which began in the 15th century, helped spread beer to the far corners of the globe. As European powers like Spain, Portugal, England, and the Netherlands established colonies in the Americas, Asia, and Africa, they introduced beer to new lands and brought back exotic ingredients. One of the most notable trade exchanges was the introduction of sugar and spices to Europe. While sugar was primarily used to sweeten wines and create cocktails, it also influenced the brewing of some sweetened styles of beer. As global trade expanded, European brewers began to experiment with new flavors, contributing to the growth of beer styles such as porter, stout, and pale ale by the late 17th century. The influx of new crops, particularly corn and rice from the Americas, also played a role in diversifying beer production. While barley remained the primary grain, these new ingredients were sometimes incorporated into brewing, particularly in the colonies, to extend the reach of beer production. In England, beer was becoming increasingly popular during the Tudor period, 1485–1603, and into the Stuart period, 1603 to 1714. While wine continued to be the drink of choice for the upper classes, beer was ubiquitous across society. It was consumed at breakfast, during work, and at social gatherings. The English also embraced ale as a more potent version of beer, often fermented longer to increase alcohol content. By the time of the English Civil War in the mid-17th century, beer had become entrenched in English society. Beer houses and ale houses were common throughout England. These establishments, often run by women known as alewives, provided a place for socializing and drinking. Ale houses were considered so essential to the community that they were granted certain legal protections. In fact, the alehouse became a focal point for local news, gossip, and sometimes even politics. In the Netherlands, beer gained even more prominence during the Golden Age, 16th to 17th century, when brewing became an essential part of the economy. Dutch brewers introduced innovations in brewing and helped to spread the popularity of beer throughout Europe, including the development of lager beers, which would go on to dominate beer production in the modern era. Towards the end of the Renaissance and into the early modern period, the scientific method began to influence brewing in new ways. As early as the 16th century, there was growing recognition of the importance of yeast in fermentation, though it would take several centuries before scientists fully understood its role. Early pioneers like Anton van Leeuwenhoek, the Dutch scientist, contributed to the understanding of yeast in the late 17th century, and this knowledge would lead to improvements in the brewing process. The growth of modern brewing technologies in the 17th and 18th centuries, including the development of temperature-controlled fermentation and more refined brewing equipment, set the stage for the revolution in brewing that would occur during the Industrial Revolution. The Renaissance and early modern period were transformative times for beer. From humble beginnings as a drink of necessity, beer had evolved into a respected beverage enjoyed by all social classes. The establishment of brewing guilds, the rise of hops, and the expansion of trade ensured that beer would continue to play a central role in European society. This period laid the foundation for the modern brewing industry, and the innovations of the Renaissance period would shape the brewing traditions that we know today. The Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries marked a seismic shift not only in technology and society, but also in the way beer was produced and consumed. This period saw a leap in brewing techniques, as well as innovations that helped turn beer from a traditional craft into a mass-produced commodity. The Industrial Revolution introduced new methods of production, more standardized ingredients, and innovations that paved the way for the global beer industry we know today. The key to beer's transformation during the Industrial Revolution was the mechanization of brewing. Before this period, beer was brewed in small batches by hand, often by independent brewers or within local communities. The brewing process itself was slow, labor-intensive, and required significant skill. As industrialization spread across Europe, new machines were developed to streamline and speed up the brewing process. One of the most important innovations was the steam-powered engine, which enabled brewers to produce beer more efficiently by automating tasks such as malting, mashing, and boiling. Steam power allowed large-scale breweries to produce beer on an industrial scale, making it possible to meet the growing demand of urban populations. Breweries also began to invest in brewing equipment, such as pumps and automated filling systems, which replaced traditional methods of fermentation and bottling. This shift allowed for consistent production and faster turnaround times. The ability to produce beer in larger quantities, along with innovations in refrigeration and storage, made it possible to distribute beer widely across cities and even internationally. The Industrial Revolution also saw the development and popularization of lager beer, which would eventually come to dominate beer styles worldwide. Lagers were a direct result of advancements in refrigeration technology. Prior to the late 19th century, beers were fermented at room temperature, which led to the creation of ales, which had a faster fermentation process and often a more robust, fruity flavor. In the colder climates of Germany and Austria, brewers began to experiment with fermenting beer at much lower temperatures, a process that resulted in a cleaner, crisper beer with a longer shelf life. This style of beer, called lager, was developed in the late 18th century and would become the most popular style in the world. The advent of refrigeration during the Industrial Revolution made it possible to store lager beer at the necessary cool temperatures, allowing for wider distribution and longer preservation. The first lager beer was brewed in Bavaria, and by the mid-19th century, lager beers were being produced in large-scale breweries throughout Germany, Czechia, and other parts of Central Europe. The widespread popularity of lager beers, including iconic styles like Pilsner and Helles, marked a new era for beer, one where consistency and mass production were prioritized. The 19th century also saw significant advancements in brewing science. Thanks to the work of pioneers in chemistry and microbiology, brewers were able to better understand the fermentation process and improve the quality of beer. One of the most significant breakthroughs came in 1857, when French scientist Louis Pasteur demonstrated the role of yeast in fermentation and discovered that heating beer could kill harmful bacteria, preventing spoilage. Pasteur's work in microbiology laid the foundation for pasteurization, which revolutionized the beer industry. By the 1870s, large breweries in places like England and Germany began using pasteurization to extend the shelf life of their beer, allowing for longer transportation and broader distribution. The ability to preserve beer for longer periods helped beer become a truly global product, available far beyond its place of origin. The Industrial Revolution also saw the emergence of major beer brands that would go on to dominate the global beer market. Some of the most famous brewing companies in the world began during this period. In 1873, Anheuser-Busch was founded in the United States, and it would go on to become one of the largest beer producers in the world. In 1870, Heineken was established in Amsterdam, marking the start of what would become one of the most successful beer brands globally. Similarly, Carlsberg was founded in Denmark in 1847, and it quickly grew into an international brewery, helping spread lager beer across Europe and the world. These large-scale breweries were able to leverage the efficiencies of industrial production to make beer cheaper, more widely available, and more consistent than ever before. As these breweries expanded, they helped standardize beer production, leading to the global beer market that we know today. Beer and the social changes of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution also had a profound effect on beer's social role. As people moved from rural areas to cities in search of work, beer became a central feature of urban life. The rise of the working class in the 19th century meant that beer was no longer just a drink for the lower classes. It became a social drink enjoyed by people across all levels of society. This period saw the rise of large public beer halls and pubs, where workers, factory owners, and politicians alike could come together over a drink. Beer also became an important part of the growing pub culture in countries like Britain and Germany. In London, pubs were a central gathering point for working-class people, and the beerhouse culture spread throughout the British Empire. Beer halls became iconic meeting places in Germany, where the famed Oktoberfest in Munich began in the early 19th century and evolved into the world's largest beer festival. The rise of these social spaces reflected beer's increasing cultural and social importance. The emergence of beer advertising and marketing. As beer became mass-produced, it also became a product to be marketed. The rise of large brewing companies led to the development of advertising as a key tool for promoting beer. By the late 19th century, beer brands began to use newspapers, billboards, and even early forms of radio and television advertising to reach consumers. The emphasis was placed not only on the quality of beer, but also on its connection to leisure, celebration, and relaxation. Beer advertisements from this period began to emphasize themes of masculinity, strength, and social camaraderie, helping to shape the image of beer as the drink of choice for the working class and beyond. The advertising campaigns also introduced catchy slogans, jingles, and images that made beer feel accessible and a central part of daily life. By the early 20th century, beer had truly become a global commodity. Advances in transportation, refrigeration, and marketing allowed beer to be exported across the world, reaching countries as far as Brazil, China, and Australia. Beer had evolved from a regional, local beverage into a product with a massive global reach. The global beer industry saw the development of large multinational brewing corporations, and beer became part of the global cultural exchange. With the invention of lager and the rise of iconic global beer brands, beer was no longer just a European drink, it had become a beverage that brought people together from every corner of the world. The Industrial Revolution laid the groundwork for the beer industry as we know it today. It was during this time that beer became a product that could be mass-produced, standardized, and shipped across continents. The development of lager, pasteurization, and the rise of major beer brands helped shape the beer market, making it a truly global industry. As we look back at this period, we see how the innovations of the Industrial Revolution continue to influence the way beer is brewed, distributed, and enjoyed today. The 20th century was a defining period for beer, marked by both consolidation and innovation. The early decades saw the rise of global beer giants that would dominate the market for much of the century, while the latter part of the century witnessed a craft beer revolution that transformed the way beer was brewed, marketed, and consumed. This era also saw significant shifts in beer culture, from prohibition in the United States to the globalization of beer and the explosion of beer styles in the 1980s and beyond. By the early 20th century, the beer industry had become increasingly consolidated, with a handful of large breweries emerging to dominate global beer production. In Europe and the United States, industrial brewing was the norm, and beer production was increasingly controlled by a small number of companies. This period saw the emergence of brands like Budweiser, Heineken, Carlsberg, and Corona, each with massive international reach. In the United States, Anheuser-Busch became the dominant player in the beer market, and its flagship brand Budweiser became one of the most widely consumed beers in the world. The company used its vast resources to expand its distribution network and develop an iconic brand image associated with American culture. Miller Brewing Company and Coors would later follow suit, establishing themselves as major competitors in the US market. The rise of these global beer giants marked the end of the era of small, regional breweries. The economies of scale offered by these massive corporations allowed them to produce beer more cheaply and efficiently, and their advertising campaigns helped to shape beer as the quintessential social drink for people of all walks of life. However, as the 20th century progressed, the consolidation of the beer industry raised concerns about monopolies and the homogenization of beer. As global corporations began to dominate, beer became less diverse, with a small number of mass-produced beer styles, primarily lagers, accounting for the vast majority of beer consumed worldwide. The dominance of these large brands meant that local, regional beers and unique brewing traditions were increasingly marginalized. One of the most significant events in beer history occurred in the United States with the onset of Prohibition in 1920. The 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution banned the production, sale, and distribution of alcoholic beverages, including beer. This drastic change forced many American breweries to close their doors, while others struggled to survive. Some breweries, such as Anheuser-Busch, turned to producing non-alcoholic products like soda to stay afloat during this difficult period. Prohibition decimated the American beer industry, but it also led to innovations that would eventually shape the future of brewing. Many breweries, for example, developed near beer, a beverage that was brewed to have less than 0.5% alcohol content, allowing it to be legally sold under the Prohibition laws. Others, like Al Capone's associates, became involved in the illegal trade of beer and other alcohols, which only added to the allure and mystique of beer in the eyes of the public. When Prohibition ended in 1933, the beer industry was forever changed. American breweries were able to reopen and resume production, but they had lost a significant portion of their market share to other forms of alcohol, such as spirits and wine. It wasn't until the 1940s and 1950s that beer regained its pre-prohibition popularity, with larger breweries reasserting their dominance over the market. Following World War II, the 1950s and 1960s saw the increasing globalization of beer. As transportation and refrigeration improved, beer was exported and enjoyed around the world. In Europe, countries like Germany, Belgium, and the Czech Republic continued to produce traditional, high-quality beers that were highly sought after. Meanwhile, American breweries expanded their reach internationally, with brands like Budweiser becoming globally recognized. This period also saw the rise of beer festivals around the world, with the most famous being Oktoberfest in Munich, Germany, which began in 1810 and became a major international event by the late 20th century. Beer culture became a central part of global tourism, with people traveling from all over the world to experience local beer traditions and festivals. Despite the global spread of beer, however, the beer industry was still largely dominated by a few multinational corporations. These companies used their massive advertising budgets to promote their products worldwide, cementing the image of beer as the drink of the masses. Starting in the 1970s and 1980s, a new wave of brewers began to emerge in the United States, marking the beginning of the craft beer revolution. This movement was driven by small, independent breweries that sought to create a more diverse, flavorful alternative to the mass-produced beers that had dominated the market. These breweries focused on high-quality ingredients, innovative brewing techniques, and a return to traditional, regional beer styles that had been largely forgotten in the era of mass production. One of the most influential pioneers of this movement was Ken Grossman, the founder of Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, which was established in 1980 in Chico, California. Sierra Nevada's flagship beer, Pale Ale, became one of the defining beers of the craft beer movement, known for its bold, hoppy flavor and high-quality ingredients. As the craft beer movement grew, more and more breweries sprang up across the United States and the world. By the 1990s, there were hundreds of small craft breweries in operation, each with its own unique approach to brewing. The movement spread internationally, with microbreweries and brewpubs opening up in countries like the United Kingdom, Belgium, and Australia, each adapting craft beer principles to their own brewing traditions. One of the most exciting aspects of the craft beer revolution was the explosion of beer styles. Brewers began experimenting with new ingredients, such as exotic fruits, spices, and herbs, to create unique and bold beers that had never been seen before. This period saw the resurgence of old-world beer styles, like India, pale ales, IPAs, porters, and stouts, as well as the creation of entirely new styles, such as imperial stouts and barrel-aged beers. The craft beer revolution also gave rise to a new breed of beer enthusiasts who became passionate about trying different styles, learning about the brewing process, and supporting small, independent breweries. Beer festivals like the Great American Beer Festival in Denver, Colorado, became major events, celebrating the creativity and diversity of the craft beer world. Today, beer is more diverse than ever. The craft beer revolution has completely reshaped the beer landscape, with small breweries competing with the global giants, offering an unprecedented variety of flavors, styles, and brewing traditions. While mass-produced lagers and pilsners remain dominant, the rise of craft beer has revitalized beer culture, making beer a dynamic and ever-evolving product that appeals to a new generation of drinkers. Beer is now enjoyed globally, with millions of drinkers worldwide sampling local brews and international imports alike. The rise of craft breweries and the interest in beer pairings, beer tourism, and beer appreciation has also led to the creation of a vibrant beer culture that continues to grow and change. The world of beer has come full circle, from its humble beginnings as a drink of necessity to its status as a global commodity, and finally, to its current form as a celebrated and innovative industry that champions diversity and creativity. As we step into the 21st century, beer stands as one of the most widely consumed beverages in the world, a symbol of tradition, innovation, and cultural significance. From its origins as a humble, ancient drink brewed by the Sumerians more than 6,000 years ago, to its current status as a global commodity, beer has experienced remarkable growth and evolution. Today, beer continues to be enjoyed by millions of people worldwide. But what lies ahead for the world's most beloved drink? In the modern era, beer is consumed on every continent, and its reach continues to expand. The global beer market is now more diverse than ever, with beer drinkers spanning different cultures, tastes, and preferences. While traditional beer-drinking nations like the United States, Germany, and the United Kingdom continue to lead the way, there has been a marked increase in beer consumption in previously untapped markets, particularly in Asia, Latin America, and parts of Africa. Countries like China, which is now the world's largest beer market by volume, have embraced beer in a major way. China's beer industry, while still dominated by mass-produced lagers, has seen a rise in interest in craft beer over the past decade, with an increasing number of small breweries popping up across major cities. Similarly, countries in Africa, such as South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria, are witnessing growing beer consumption, driven by a young population and increasing disposable incomes. As the beer industry expands into these emerging markets, there are new opportunities and challenges for brewers. Local breweries must contend with the influence of multinational corporations, while larger brands face the task of adapting their products to local tastes and preferences. Global beer companies, such as AB InBev, Heineken, and Carlsberg, have already made strategic acquisitions in these regions, cementing their global dominance. However, the rise of local breweries and the increasing demand for unique and culturally relevant beers offers exciting prospects for innovation. Despite the dominance of global beer giants, the craft beer revolution shows no signs of slowing down. Since its explosion in the 1980s, the craft beer movement has fundamentally changed the beer industry. Today there are thousands of independent craft breweries around the world, each producing a vast array of unique, flavorful beers that cater to a growing market of beer enthusiasts. Craft beer's rise has brought a focus on quality, creativity, and localization. Breweries are experimenting with a wide range of ingredients, spices, fruits, hops, and even exotic elements like coffee and chocolate, to create beers that challenge traditional flavor profiles. The craft beer revolution has revitalized the role of beer as not just a drink, but an art form, and it has made beer culture more sophisticated and diverse than ever before. In countries like the United States, Belgium, and the United Kingdom, craft beer festivals attract tens of thousands of people eager to sample new styles and meet the passionate brewers behind them. Events like the Great American Beer Festival in Denver and Belgium's Brussels Beer Weekend celebrate the creativity and diversity of small, independent breweries. As craft beer continues to thrive, many larger breweries are joining the movement by launching their own craft-style beers, and some are even acquiring successful craft breweries to tap into the growing demand for high-quality, innovative brews. As the beer industry continues to evolve, one of the most pressing issues for brewers is sustainability. The brewing process is resource-intensive, with large amounts of water, energy, and raw ingredients required. Climate change, water scarcity, and environmental degradation are challenges that the beer industry must address if it is to remain sustainable in the long term. Many breweries are now making concerted efforts to reduce their environmental footprint by adopting greener practices. Water conservation is a key priority, as beer production requires significant amounts of water, especially in areas facing droughts. Energy-efficient brewing technologies are being developed, and some breweries are turning to renewable energy sources to power their operations. Packaging is another area where breweries are making strides, with an increasing number of companies adopting recyclable or biodegradable materials to reduce waste. Additionally, some brewers are focusing on sustainable sourcing of ingredients, such as locally grown barley and hops, to reduce transportation emissions and support local farmers. The use of organic ingredients is also growing in popularity, as consumers become more conscientious about the environmental and ethical implications of their purchasing decisions. As beer continues to evolve, one of the most exciting aspects of its future is the ongoing innovation in beer styles. Beer styles have exploded in the last few decades, and the pace of innovation is showing no signs of slowing down. The future of beer is likely to be shaped by new brewing technologies, global influences, and an ever-growing consumer demand for new flavors and experiences. One area of innovation is non-alcoholic beer, which has seen a surge in popularity, especially among younger consumers and those seeking a healthier lifestyle. With better brewing techniques and improved flavor profiles, non-alcoholic beer is no longer just a compromise for those avoiding alcohol. It has become a category in its own right. The rise of low and no alcohol beers mirrors the growing trend of mindful drinking, where consumers seek to enjoy the taste of beer without the effects of alcohol. The emergence of beer cocktails is another exciting development. Some brewers are experimenting with blending beer with spirits, fruit juices, and even herbs to create hybrid drinks that appeal to adventurous drinkers looking for new experiences. Additionally, barrel aging and the use of wild yeast are pushing the boundaries of flavor, with brewers creating complex, one-of-a-kind brews that are aged in oak barrels or fermented with unusual yeast strains for a distinct taste. International beer styles will continue to play an important role in shaping the future of brewing. Globalization has led to the fusion of beer cultures, with brewers experimenting with ingredients, techniques, and traditions from across the world. Beers like Japanese rice lagers, Belgian-style saisons, and Mexican cervezas are inspiring new styles and collaborations that cross cultural boundaries, creating a dynamic and diverse beer landscape. Beer has come a long way since its first brewing over 6,000 years ago in ancient Sumer. From humble beginnings as a drink of necessity, beer has grown into a global commodity, a symbol of innovation, and a core part of cultures worldwide. It has brought people together for feasts, religious ceremonies, and social gatherings, and it continues to be a drink of celebration, community, and creativity. As the beer industry continues to evolve, the future of beer will undoubtedly be shaped by new technologies, cultural shifts, and environmental concerns. But one thing remains clear. Beer will always be more than just a drink. It's a symbol of human ingenuity, history, and the shared experience of people across the globe. Whether enjoyed in a bustling pub, at a quiet family gathering, or at a lively beer festival, beer will continue to bring people together for generations to come.